Forget everything you think you know about American air superiority. Forget the glossy Lockheed Martin brochures, and forget the sanitized press releases your television anchors have been reading to you like bedtime stories. If you turn on the news right now, in April 2026, they are selling you a beautifully constructed narrative. They are talking about a diplomatic breakthrough in the Persian Gulf. They are calling it a calculated strategic pause, a 2-week window to cool tensions. That is institutional dishonesty at its finest, because the kinetic reality unfolding on the ground tells a completely different story. This is not a diplomatic triumph. This is a frantic, bleeding tactical retreat. While the political class talks about negotiation, the actual combat reports arriving at the Pentagon tell us that Iran has just confirmed the kill of a second American F-35 stealth fighter, a second F-35, the crown jewel of Western military engineering, neutralized. And that is on top of the open source intelligence confirming the loss of at least 3 FA-18 Super Hornets, along with their naval aviators, wiped out during the Gulf operations. The United States military is not suspending strikes because they suddenly found a diplomatic off-ramp. They are issuing a stand-down order because their supposedly invisible jets are turning into burning wreckage, and the shock waves from this technical failure are about to shatter a maritime choke point that the West simply cannot afford to lose. Stay with me, because the physics of what brought that F-35 down is going to fundamentally change how you view this war. To understand the magnitude of this failure, you have to look at the clinical anatomy of the kill. The Pentagon has spent decades building an entire combat doctrine around the concept of stealth. The F-35 relies on a highly classified radar-absorbent material coating, or RAM, engineered to absorb incoming radar waves and theoretically reduce the aircraft's signature to the size of a golf ball. That is the multi-billion-dollar sales pitch. But the Iranians did not fight the sales pitch. They fought the physics. Iran's indigenous multi-layered air defense grid, specifically utilizing network systems like the Bavar 373 and the Cordad 15, executed something that Western defense contractors insisted was impossible. They networked their 3D active electronically scanned array radars and deployed crossband frequency scanning algorithms. Let me translate that technical jargon into operational reality. They did not just passively scan the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of the jet. They actively stripped the F-35's stealth coating away in the electromagnetic spectrum. By sweeping multiple frequency bands simultaneously, the IRGC bypassed the narrow X-band optimization of the F-35's stealth shaping. They blinded the sensor fusion of a Lockheed Martin platform with domestic asymmetrical hardware. And this brings us to the raw mathematics of the engagement. In military intelligence, we analyze operational sustainability through the lens of exchange ratios. This is exactly where the American strategic posture completely falls apart. A single F-35, whether it is the A, B, or C variant, costs the American taxpayer somewhere between $80 and $100 million per airframe. That is the base unit cost, completely ignoring the specialized maintenance logistics, the supply chain vulnerabilities, and the years of multi-million-dollar pilot training. The Iranian indigenous interceptor that knocked it out of the sky costs at most a few $100,000 to manufacture. Let that 1-200 ratio sink in for a moment. You are witnessing an adversary spending $1 to vaporize 200 of yours. The United States is feeding $80 to $100 million assets into a meat grinder against a defense architecture that can replenish its ammunition faster, cheaper, and with lethal discipline. Decades of American research and development, tens of billions in defense appropriations turned into scrap metal by cost-effective, precise, locally manufactured ordnance. This is not a sustainable attrition model. It is an economic death spiral written in kinetic impacts, and the people sitting in the Pentagon know it. You cannot win a war of attrition when your primary delivery system costs 200 times more than the bullet designed to kill it. But the destruction of that aircraft is merely a symptom of a much larger, fatal disease infecting American strategic planning. Because when you lose control of the airspace, when your fifth generation fighters can no longer penetrate an anti access area denial network without taking catastrophic losses, you lose the ability to project power below that airspace. The kinetic failure in the sky over the Middle East has directly triggered the collapse of American maritime dominance on the water below it. The fundamental premise of the American military posture for the last 50 years has been the A2AD doctrine, anti-access area denial. Washington believed it held the monopoly on dictating who gets to operate in critical strategic theaters. What the downing of the F-35 proves is that the monopoly is broken. Iran has flipped the A2AD script entirely. They have built an exclusion zone, and the United States Navy is standing on the outside looking in. This isn't just about losing jets. It's about losing the geography that those jets were supposed to secure. Right now, the IRGC has functionally locked down the Strait of Hormuz. That is not a regional inconvenience. That narrow waterway is the choke point for 20% of the entire world's oil supply. It is the jugular vein of the global energy market. The political response from the West was entirely predictable and entirely useless. Washington attempted to force a UN resolution to mandate the reopening of the strait. It was immediately and categorically vetoed by Russia and China. The diplomatic route is dead, and the military route, the United States Navy, the most expensive maritime force in human history, is effectively paralyzed. They will not dare order a carrier strike group or a commercial escort mission to run the strait. They cannot provide air cover because their stealth fighters are getting swatted out of the sky by the Bavar 373, and they cannot risk their surface combatants against Iran's coastal anti-ship missile batteries. Without that air cover, the fleet is deterred. But the strategic bleeding does not stop at the Persian Gulf. The tumor has metastasized to the Red Sea. The United States spent months boasting about Operation Prosperity Guardian, the multinational maritime coalition designed to protect shipping lanes from the Houthis. That coalition is fractured into irrelevance. Let me give you the operational timeline from just a few days ago in early April 2026. At precisely 15:45 local time, the Houthis deployed unmanned surface vehicles, naval suicide drones, and successfully breached the hull of a commercial bulk carrier. The damage was so severe, so immediately catastrophic to the vessel's structural integrity, that the crew was forced to abandon ship. Operation Prosperity Guardian was supposed to prevent exactly that. It failed. The United States and its allies have spent billions trying to secure the Red Sea, and a proxy force utilizing asymmetrical naval drones just demonstrated that the maritime security umbrella is an absolute illusion. When an adversary can shut down the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously sink commercial tonnage in the Red Sea at will, they are no longer just fighting a military campaign, they are executing an economic siege against the Western supply chain, and the blast radius of that siege is already hitting the markets. The collapse of the maritime security umbrella is not just a military embarrassment, it is a financial detonator. When 20% of the global oil supply is physically bottlenecked at Hormuz, the Brent crude market does not just fluctuate, it prepares for structural failure. But the true vulnerability isn't the oil itself, it is the underwriting that allows that oil to move. Look at the maritime insurance syndicates at Lloyd's of London. The Joint War Committee does not care about Pentagon press briefings or White House reassurances. They run actuarial risk algorithms based on kinetic reality. Right now, those underwriters are jacking up the war risk premium to mathematically impossible levels. In many cases, they are outright refusing to issue coverage for Western-flagged bulk carriers and tankers attempting to navigate the Persian Gulf. Understand the commercial physics here. If Lloyd's does not underwrite the hull, the ship does not sail. period. Without insurance, global freight rates are skyrocketing. The international logistics network is absorbing a massive unscheduled tax on every single container and barrel moving through the region. For the European Union and the United States, this is not a temporary supply chain glitch. This is the immediate onset of a second energy shock. This is how you bleed a superpower. You don't need to invade their mainland, you just sever their economic arteries. The cascading inflation from these compounded logistics costs is already baking into the price of industrial manufacturing, agricultural production, and basic consumer goods. The financial elite in the West are watching their profit margins evaporate because the United States military can no longer guarantee the safe transit of commercial capital. And that catastrophic financial hemorrhaging is the exact reason why the political rhetoric out of Washington suddenly, miraculously pivoted to diplomacy. Listen to the exact quote coming out of Washington right now. I want you to read it, parse it, and understand exactly how institutional deception is engineered. According to international reports, including Al Jazeera broadcasts between April 7th and April 8th, the official line is this: the White House has confirmed the U.S. has agreed to suspend all bombing and military attacks on Iran for 2 weeks. Read that again carefully. Agreed to suspend. The vocabulary of the political class is designed to sanitize failure and project an illusion of control. Suspend implies authority. It implies that Washington is holding the leash, graciously offering the adversary a window to de-escalate, taking the moral high ground to allow for diplomatic back channels to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That is a meticulously crafted lie. You do not suspend a kinetic campaign when you possess air supremacy. You do not voluntarily halt operations when your maritime coalition is functioning as designed. You issue a stand-down order because you are engaged in a tactical surrender. Let us strip away the diplomatic packaging and look at the brutal operational reality. The United States government did not agree to a pause. They were forced into a corner by the mathematics of a war they cannot afford to fight. You cannot continue to bomb an adversary when your primary strike platform, the F-35 stealth fighter, is being systematically hunted and destroyed by a domestic air defense network that you spent the last decade dismissing as inferior. Washington is not giving Iran space to negotiate. Washington is begging for time. They need these 2 weeks to sweep the burning wreckage of their stealth jets off the ground. They need this window to frantically figure out how to bypass the crossband frequency scanning algorithms that just neutralized Lockheed Martin's most expensive engineering. More importantly, they are pausing because the financial elite, the people who actually dictate policy in the West, are screaming for a tourniquet. The White House is watching Lloyd's of London functionally freeze maritime transit. They are watching the Brent crude index edge toward a systemic crisis. They are watching the global supply chain hemorrhage cash due to catastrophic freight rates and mathematically impossible insurance premiums. This 2-week suspension is not a diplomatic maneuver. It is an emergency brake pulled by a superpower that just realized its military hardware cannot solve its geographic and economic vulnerabilities. They are not negotiating from a position of strength. They are stalling for time while their entire strategic doctrine bleeds out on the table. We are now watching the clock tick down on this 2-week window. I want you to consider the strategic nightmare waiting in the final 48 hours before that suspension expires. What happens when the political cover story simply runs out of time? What if Washington actually decides to resume the kinetic campaign? Imagine the order going out to send another squadron of 80 to $100 million stealth fighters back into the crosshairs of a domestic air defense grid that already proved it can peel back their RAM coatings. What if a third F-35 goes down, or a fourth? At what point does the 1-200 cost exchange ratio mathematically break the United States military? And more critically, what if resuming the bombing is the exact trigger that pushes Brent crude past the threshold of total systemic collapse? But look at the alternative. What if the Pentagon advises the White House to extend the pause indefinitely? What if they quietly pack up the remnants of Operation Prosperity Guardian and leave the carrier strike group safely at anchor? If they choose that path, they are not just retreating. They are effectively handing the physical keys to the Strait of Hormuz, the Red Sea, and 20% of the global oil supply directly to the axis of resistance. Washington is staring down a two-way street where both directions lead to a strategic abyss. Will they choose an unspoken military humiliation to save the global economy, or will they risk bankrupting the Western supply chain just to prove their stealth doctrine isn't entirely dead? Think about the price of that arrogance the next time someone in a suit promises you a surgical victory.